Hey everyone, so now that you know how to calculate the slope, what's the next challenge? The next challenge is to know how to use that slope and an intercept to figure out the equation of a straight line. In this video, I'm going to show you two common scenarios that appear in math questions where you need to figure out the linear equation. Now, if you don't know how to calculate the slope, click on this link up here to go and watch the first video in this series. Now, if you know how to calculate the slope and you know how to find the linear equation and you want to do something a little bit more challenging, then click on this link up here to figure out linear equations of parallel lines and perpendicular lines. Otherwise, keep watching this video for today's tutorial. My name is Peter, grab your calculator and let's get started. When you want to write linear equations, you need to come up with a form that you're going to use to write linear equations. In this video, we're going to be using the slope-intercept form to write those linear equations. The slope-intercept form looks like this equation down here, y equals to mx plus b. I'm going to explain this slope-intercept form in a few seconds, but it's important for you to know that you need to write this form exactly the way it looks like here. There is another form called the standard form, which is used to represent linear equations, but that's not going to be covered in this video. Here's a formal definition of the slope-intercept form, and basically it's a linear equation of a non-vertical line given by this equation, y equals to mx plus b. You have already seen the definition of m, which represents the slope. If not, click on this link up here to understand a little bit more about the slope. B, on the other hand, it's called the y-intercept, and I'm going to give you a formal definition of that. So the slope is a line that represents the constant rate of change of a linear function, and y-intercept, which is the new concept of a graph, is the y-coordinate of a point where the graph crosses the y-axis. So whenever you see that straight line crossing the y-axis, at that y-coordinate, that's called the y-intercept. If we have these two values, then we can pretty much figure out what is the equation of that line. So can you identify the slope and y-intercept in these equations? We're going to go through each of these three equations and figure out what is the slope and what is the y-intercept. The slope and the y-intercept are supposed to be numbers. The answers to those three equations here should not be variables. So the first equation, y equals to 5x minus 1, the slope is going to be 5. What about the y-intercept? The y-intercept is simply going to be -1. In the second equation, what do you think the slope is? Well, the slope is going to be 5 over 2. And what's the y-intercept? The y-intercept is -3. In the third equation, what's the slope of that line? The slope is -1 over 4. And what's the y-intercept? The y-intercept is just a +1. So how can you write the equation of a line? There are two main scenarios where you need to figure out how to write the equation of a line. And the first scenario is when you're given a graph, and the second scenario is when you're given 2 points. Both of these scenarios are equally challenging, but the main objective is you'll need to figure out the slope and you'll need to also calculate the y-intercept, and then write those two numbers in the slope-intercept form for the final answer. In this exercise, we want to write the equations of the lines in the graphs below. So this line here on the left side, we need to write our final answer in the slope-intercept form. In this process, we need to find the y-intercept, and then we also need to find the slope. To calculate the slope, we need to use this formula, vertical change divided by horizontal change. So let's go ahead and start off by finding the y-intercept of this graph on the left. The y-intercept is where the blue line is crossing the y-axis, and it's crossing the y-axis where it's -2. So that's how fast you can find the y-intercept. The next part is to find the slope. Now we need two good points. We need to find where this blue line is crossing the corners. Where the corners are of all these squares are exactly x and y values. You don't have to estimate like a decimal. So the first good point is actually the y-intercept. The other good point is a little bit up here. If you want to use this point down here or another point down here, it's fine, you'll get the same answer. But for this calculation, we'll use only these 2 points here. So in the numerator of our fraction, we need to find the vertical change. The vertical change is going to be only one step moving upwards, and that's going to be +1 in our fraction. If you want to figure out the horizontal change, you need to count how many squares you're going to move to the right. So if you move to the right, there's going to be only 2 squares. So our fraction here is going to be 1/2. Our slope here, which is positive, should match the graph that we're given. This graph here, the line is increasing from left to right, which means that it's a positive slope. So now we can write our final answer as y equals to 1/2x minus 2. In the other graph here, we need to figure out the first thing is the y-intercept. That's the easiest thing to figure out. So the y-intercept here is approximately 2.5. So we're going to write b equals to 2.5. The next thing we need to figure out is the slope. So we need 2 good points. We need to find 2 corners where this blue line is crossing. The first really good point is up here. The other really good point, we have to move down the line all the way down here, and we find the other really good point. So now we're ready to find the vertical change. The vertical change, we need to move downwards from this point up here. We need to move all the way down until we reach the point that is across from the second coordinate. We need to move down 8 squares. So if you move down 8 squares, here it's going to be -8. After you move down 8 squares, now you need to move to the right. You need to move to the right. And you're going to move to the right 5 squares. So the horizontal change is going to be +5. When you move downwards, it's negative. When you move to the left, is negative. When you move to the right, is positive. And when you move upwards, it's positive. So our final equation is going to be y is equal to -8/5x plus 2.5. So let's try now to figure out the equation of a line that is passing through 2 points. In our first equation here, we're only given 2 points. The first thing that we need to do is to figure out the slope, because this information that we're given, there's really no way for us to figure out what the y-intercept is. So to calculate the slope, we need to figure out the vertical change divided by the horizontal change. The vertical change in this case, it's going to be 0 minus -15, and the horizontal change is 3 minus -11. In the numerator, it's going to be the same as 0 plus 15, and that's equal to 15. And in the denominator, 3 plus 11 is 14. The next step is, now we need to figure out what the y-intercept is. I'm going to use the slope and one of these 2 points to figure out what b is. So where there is y, I'm going to substitute y and the value 0. And where there's m, I'm going to substitute m and put 15/4. And where there's x, I'm going to substitute x and put the number 3. And the only unknown is b. Now if I multiply 3 times 15, I'm going to get 45/14 plus b. This is a simple one-step equation. If I move this positive number over to the left side, I'm going to remain with b is equal to -45/14. The only thing remaining is to put these 2 numbers, the slope and the y-intercept, into the slope-intercept form. And my final answer is going to be y is equal to 15/4x minus 45/14. In the second math problem, we're given 2 points again, and so the process is going to be the same. Calculate the slope and then calculate the y-intercept. So to calculate the slope, I need to subtract -19 minus -7, and in the denominator, 1 minus -2. In the numerator, -19 plus 7 is equal to -12. And in the denominator, we have 1 plus 2 equals to +3. When you simplify this fraction, the slope is going to be -4. In the next step, I'm going to choose one of these 2 points, and I'm going to use the slope, which is -4, to figure out what b is. So I'm going to substitute the y value with -19. I'm going to substitute the slope with -4. And I'm going to substitute the x with a +1. And the only unknown is b. When I multiply -4 times 1, I'm going to get positive -4 plus b. This is a simple one-step equation. All I need to do is move this -4 over to the left side and it becomes a +4. -19 plus 4 is equal to -15, and that's the value of b. I have my slope, I have my y-intercept. The only thing that's remaining is to write the final answer in the slope-intercept form, which is y equals to -4x minus 15. Here's a quick pro tip. Before you start figuring out what the linear equation is going to be, you need to remember the two important things that you always need. The first important thing is the slope. The second important thing is the y-intercept. The y-intercept is usually the easier number to figure out, so start with that one and then you can calculate the slope. And that's the pro tip. So here's some independent exercises. In both exercises, you need to write the linear equation given the following situations. The one on the left, you're given a graph, and the one on the right, you're given 2 points. If you're not sure what to do, you can always rewind the video, watch the examples again, and then try the exercises. The solutions for both exercises are in the description box below. Good luck!